My father called my promotion pathetic. After 18 years in uniform, I stood in that auditorium as a new major, staring at 3 empty seats where my family should have been. 6 weeks later, my photo appeared beside Pentagon officials, and suddenly they were proud of me. But their pride was not love, it was need. And when I found my signature on documents I had never seen, I realized my family had not come back to celebrate me. They had come back to use me. I remember the sound of my own shoes before I remember anything else. The heels of my dress uniform clicked softly against the polished floor of the auditorium, each step measured, each breath held tighter than the last. Outside, Virginia was wrapped in a pale gray morning, the kind of cold late winter day that made every window look silver and every breath feel borrowed. Inside the hall, everything was bright, formal, and exact. Rows of chairs had been lined up with military precision. Flags stood at attention near the stage. Officers spoke in low voices near the front, their ribbons catching the light whenever they turned. I had stood in rooms like that for 18 years, but that morning felt different. That morning I was not just reporting for duty, I was being promoted to major. For weeks I had told myself not to care too much. I had repeated the same practical words in my head, the way I always did when I felt something rising too close to the surface. It is just a ceremony. It is just a rank. It is just a day. But no matter how disciplined I tried to be, I could not make myself believe that. 18 years had gone into that pin. 18 years of waking before dawn, moving from one post to another, missing birthdays, missing holidays, packing my life into government housing and temporary apartments, learning to make loneliness look like strength. I had spent holidays eating cafeteria turkey under fluorescent lights. I had answered calls in the middle of the night and kept my voice steady even when my hands shook. I had built a career out of endurance. That promotion was not just another title. It was proof that the years had counted. I had saved 3 seats for my family. One for my father, Robert Harper, one for my mother, Carol, one for my younger brother, Michael. I had chosen seats close enough that I would see them when I walked across the stage, but not so close that anyone would notice if my mother cried. That thought had embarrassed me when it first crossed my mind, because my mother had never been the kind of woman who cried for me in public. Still, I imagined it. I imagined my father sitting stiffly in his suit, pretending not to be moved. I imagined Michael making some joke afterward, the kind that sounded careless but might have contained, if I listened closely enough, a little pride. The night before, I had called home one last time. My father answered with the television loud in the background. I told him the ceremony started at 10. There was a pause, then a sigh. Not the kind of sigh that meant disappointment, the kind that meant inconvenience. "Emily," he said, "your promotion is pathetic. It's just another title." I stood in my apartment kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear and stared at the refrigerator as if the magnets on it could explain what I had done wrong. I wanted to tell him it was not pathetic. I wanted to tell him that I had earned it. Instead, I said nothing. Silence had always been the safest language in our family. My mother called later, softer, but not kinder. She said Michael had an important client meeting and that the drive would be difficult for them. She told me she hoped I understood. I almost laughed when she said that, because understanding had been my assigned role since childhood. I understood when Michael needed help. I understood when Dad was tired. I understood when Mom forgot to ask about my life. I understood so often that no one ever wondered what it cost me. Still, when the auditorium began to fill, I looked toward those 3 seats. At first, I told myself they were running late. Then I told myself parking must have been bad. Then I stopped telling myself anything at all. The chairs remained empty, 3 quiet spaces in the middle of a room full of witnesses. When my name was called, I rose because my body knew what to do, even when my heart did not. I walked forward. I stood straight. I repeated the words expected of me. I felt the new insignia placed carefully, officially, against my uniform. People applauded. Someone smiled at me. I smiled back, because that was what Major Emily Harper was supposed to do. But behind my eyes, All I could see were those 3 empty chairs. Then, near the back row, I noticed Hank Miller. He was my old neighbor from Dayton, a widower with slow steps, silver hair, and a brown suit I recognized from church funerals and graduation parties. He had driven all that way by himself. In his hands was a small envelope, bent slightly at one corner. After the ceremony, he waited until the crowd thinned before coming over. He did not make a speech. He simply held out the card and said, "I'm proud of you, Emily." I had trained myself not to cry in uniform, but in that moment, I came close. Because the man who had no obligation to be there had shown up, while the people whose names were written into every old wound of my life had not. After Hank left that afternoon, I sat in my apartment with his card on the kitchen table and my new rank still pinned to my uniform jacket. The card was simple, the kind sold in grocery stores near the pharmacy aisle, with a blue border and a few printed words about being proud of someone's achievement. But Hank had written a sentence inside in his careful, slanted handwriting. "You earned every bit of this." I read it more times than I wanted to admit. Then, without meaning to, I started thinking about Dayton, about the narrow house on Maple Ridge Lane, about the version of myself who had learned very early not to expect anyone to clap for her too loudly. From the outside, the Harper family looked ordinary enough. My father, Robert, was stern, but respected. My mother, Carol, kept the house clean, remembered church potlucks, mailed Christmas cards on time, and knew exactly what to say when neighbors asked how we were doing. Michael and I were the 2 Harper children, 4 years apart, both expected to behave, both expected to make the family look decent. But inside that house, there had always been 2 sets of rules. Michael could stumble, and everyone rushed to soften the ground beneath him. I could succeed, and everyone acted as if success had required nothing from me at all. When Michael broke curfew, Dad said boys tested limits. When I came home 10 minutes late from work because the bus was slow, I got a lecture about responsibility. When Michael failed algebra, Mom said he was under pressure. When I brought home straight A's, Dad barely looked up from the newspaper and said, "Good, keep it that way." I used to tell myself that meant he trusted me. For years, I turned neglect into a compliment because it was easier than admitting what it really was. By 16, I was working weekends at a diner off Wilmington Pike, refilling coffee for truck drivers and elderly couples who tipped in quarters. I smelled like fryer oil when I came home, my feet sore, my homework folded into my backpack beside my apron. I saved most of what I earned because I already knew college would not become a family emergency the way Michael's needs always did. When I won a partial scholarship my senior year, I expected my father to be pleased. He took the letter from my hand, scanned it, and said, "Well, you've always known how to take care of yourself." My mother smiled and said I was lucky. Lucky. I remember that word more clearly than the scholarship amount. Michael, meanwhile, brought home a report card, so bad my parents held a private meeting in the kitchen after dinner. 2 weeks later, Dad bought him a used red Chevy, because, as he put it, the boy needs motivation. I stood in the driveway watching Michael run his hands over the hood, grinning like he had earned a prize, while I held my diner uniform over one arm and tried not to feel small. That was the pattern. Michael's failures were treated like fragile things that needed protection. My effort was treated like a machine that would keep running no matter how little anyone maintained it. When I enlisted, I thought maybe that would finally sound big enough to them. I had signed papers that would take me out of Ohio and into a life none of us fully understood. My mother cried, but not in the way I had imagined. She cried because she was worried about what people might think, worried I would be lonely, worried I was making things harder for myself. My father only said, "At least you'll have benefits." Not pride, not fear, not even much surprise, just benefits. Years later, when Michael opened Harper Strategic Solutions, my parents acted as if the family had been handed a crown. Dad talked about him at cookouts. Mom saved every business card he printed. Nobody mentioned that he had dropped out of one program, burned through money in another, and borrowed from them more times than anyone counted. To them, Michael was potential, always shining just ahead of him, no matter how many times he failed to reach it. I was stability, useful and silent, already built. Sitting in my apartment after the promotion ceremony, with Hank's card beside me and my family's empty seats still burned into my mind, I understood something I had avoided for most of my life. That morning had not been the first time they failed to show up for me. It was only the first time I could no longer pretend I had not noticed. 6 weeks after my promotion ceremony, I was standing near the edge of a crowded press room in Washington, D.C., trying to look like I belonged there more than I felt I did. The event was about cybersecurity readiness and defense infrastructure, the kind of briefing where every word had been reviewed before anyone said it aloud. I was not there to speak. I was not one of the senior officials at the podium, and no one had handed me a microphone or asked for my opinion in front of the cameras. My role was quiet, professional, and mostly invisible, which suited me. I stood behind a row of seated staff members in uniform, with my hands folded in front of me and my face arranged into the calm expression the military teaches you to wear when rooms are full of people watching. I did not know anyone had taken my picture until 2 days later, when a text from my mother appeared on my phone before sunrise. It was strange enough that I sat up in bed before opening it. My mother was not a sunrise texter unless someone was sick, angry, or needed something. But the message was cheerful. Too cheerful. Emily, your picture is in the Dayton paper. Under it was a screenshot from a local article about Ohio service members involved in national defense work. There I was, slightly out of focus, but unmistakable, standing in the background beside a row of officials, my name listed in the caption as Major Emily Harper. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because the photo was important, but because my mother had sent it with 3 exclamation points. Carol Harper had not used 3 exclamation points for me in my entire adult life. By lunchtime, she had called twice. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. The second time, I answered because some small, foolish part of me wanted to hear what pride sounded like when it came from her. She told me the article was lovely. She said Mrs. Donnelly from across the street had seen it. She said people at church were asking about me. Your father showed it to 2 men at the hardware store, she added, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I wanted to feel warm. I wanted to let that sentence settle somewhere soft inside me. Instead, it landed beside the memory of 3 empty chairs. Later that evening, my father sent a text. Just 6 words. Saw your picture. Looking sharp. I read it while standing in line at a grocery store, holding a carton of eggs and a bag of spinach. It was the closest thing to praise he had given me in years, and for one dangerous moment, I let myself believe it might be the beginning of something different. Maybe public proof had made my work real to him. Maybe seeing my name printed beside my rank had done what my ceremony could not. Maybe, after all those years, I had finally become visible. Michael called the next night. He opened with a laugh and said, "Well, well, Major Harper. Look at you hanging around the Pentagon." His voice was playful, almost proud, and I hated how quickly my guard lowered. We talked longer than we had in months. He asked about the press event, about whether I met anyone important, about how often I worked with contractors, about whether companies ever needed military references for cybersecurity bids. At first, I answered carefully but casually. Michael had always been curious when he thought something might benefit him. I told myself he was just trying to connect with me in the only language he understood: opportunity. Over the next week, my mother kept calling. She told me she had shown the article to neighbors, to cousins, to women in the church office who barely remembered my name. Dad had apparently started saying that his daughter worked with the Pentagon, which was not exactly true, but close enough for a man who liked his pride polished before displaying it. Michael began slipping Major Harper into conversations, as if the title belonged partly to him. He asked whether my name appeared on any advisory list. He asked what kind of clearance people needed for certain defense projects. He asked whether a company could mention a family connection in a proposal if the connection was informal. Each question on its own could have passed for harmless. Together they formed a shape I did not want to see. I was not suspicious yet, not fully. I was still too busy wanting my family's attention to be real. But somewhere beneath that want, something in me had gone still. Their pride had arrived too suddenly, too brightly, like a light switched on in a room that had been dark for 37 years. And I could not shake the feeling that they were not looking at me. They were looking at what my name could do. The feeling did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces, small enough at first that I could still argue with myself. A question from Michael that sounded too casual. My mother's sudden interest in my schedule. My father repeating Pentagon as if the word had been engraved on a trophy he had finally decided to claim. I carried those pieces around for several days, turning them over in my mind while I moved through work, meetings, briefings, and the ordinary rhythm of a life I had spent years keeping orderly. Then an email arrived from someone I had known earlier in my career, a man who now worked in a contracting office outside my direct chain of responsibility. The message was polite, almost routine. He said he hoped I was doing well. He said a company called Harper Strategic Solutions had appeared in a packet connected to a cybersecurity subcontract. Then he asked, gently, whether I was formally associated with them because my name had been listed as a military reference. I read that sentence 3 times. Military reference. For a few seconds, the words refused to make sense. Harper Strategic Solutions was Michael's company. It had always sounded more impressive than it was, at least to me, with its glossy business cards and vague promises about defense consulting. I had never worked for it. I had never advised it. I had never given Michael permission to connect my name to it in any professional document. Still, there it was, sitting in my inbox like a match dropped onto dry paper. I closed my office door before opening the attachment he had forwarded. My hands were steady, but only because I had spent 18 years teaching them to be steady when the rest of me was not. The first page looked ordinary enough. Company information, project language, professional wording, the kind of polished phrases people use when they want uncertainty to sound like expertise. Then I saw my full name. Major Emily Harper. Beneath it was a description of my service, written in careful, slippery language. It did not directly say I had approved the proposal, but it leaned close enough to that meaning to make my stomach tighten. My unit was referenced vaguely, not accurately enough to look official to someone who knew better, but convincing enough for someone who wanted reassurance. Farther down, on another page, I saw a signature. My signature, or rather, someone's idea of it. The shape was close, especially at a glance, but the pressure was wrong. The angle was wrong. Whoever had copied it knew what it looked like, but not how it moved. I felt something cold spread through my chest. Anger came first, sharp and clean. Then fear followed, deeper and heavier, because this was not a family insult. This was not another forgotten ceremony or careless joke. This touched my clearance, my record, my career, my retirement, everything I had built with the kind of discipline my family had always mistaken for invulnerability. For the rest of that afternoon, I functioned the way trained people function when they cannot afford to fall apart. I saved what needed to be saved. I made notes. I did not call Michael. I did not call my parents. That was the hardest part, because some old instinct in me still wanted to give them a chance to explain before I let the truth become real. But there was no innocent explanation for my name being used that way. There was no family version of this that made it harmless. By the next morning, I requested a private meeting with Colonel Elena Ruiz. She was not a woman who wasted words. She had a calm face, dark eyes that missed very little, and the kind of presence that made people sit straighter without being asked. I handed her the printed pages and watched her read. Every second felt longer than it should have. I wanted her to tell me it was sloppy, but fixable. I wanted her to say it looked worse than it was. Instead, she placed the papers flat on her desk and looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "Major Harper," she said, her voice even, "you understand what this could become." I nodded, though my throat felt tight. She did not accuse me. That almost made it worse. If she had been angry, I could have defended myself. If she had raised her voice, I could have stood behind procedure. But her restraint left me alone with the seriousness of what had happened. She told me that if I ignored it, If I tried to handle it quietly as a family matter, I would be placing myself inside the problem. She told me my first responsibility was not to my brother, not to my parents, not to the version of family loyalty I had been raised to obey. It was to the truth, to my oath, and to the integrity of the work I represented. Then she said the part I had already known but had not wanted to hear. If you report this, your family may never look at you the same way again. I looked down at the false signature, at the stolen version of my name sitting on that page, and I realized my family had already stopped looking at me clearly a long time ago. The choice in front of me was not whether I would hurt them. It was whether I would let them use me to destroy the one life I had managed to build without their help. The flight back to Dayton was delayed twice because of rain, and by the time the plane dipped through the low gray clouds over Ohio, the afternoon had already started to fade. I watched the runway appear through streaks of water on the window and felt the old weight of home settle in my chest before the wheels even touched the ground. Dayton in cold rain had a way of looking tired, as if every street and brick building had been carrying the same disappointment for too long. The roads shone black beneath the headlights, bare trees bent in the wind. Even the neighborhoods I knew by heart looked smaller than I remembered, though I could not tell if they had changed or if I had. I had not told my parents everything before coming. I only said I needed to talk in person about Michael's company and the documents connected to it. My mother immediately became gentle in that careful way she used when she was afraid a problem might become public. My father asked what time my flight landed. Michael texted me 3 times before I boarded, each message more cheerful than the last, as if friendliness could soften whatever I had discovered. No one asked whether I was all right. No one asked what it felt like to see my own name copied onto papers I had never touched. They only wanted to know when I would arrive. That told me more than any confession could have. Still, as I rode from the airport toward my parents' house, watching familiar gas stations and strip malls slide past the wet window, I felt a childish part of me hoping I had misunderstood. I hated that hope. I hated how stubbornly it survived in me, even after all the empty chairs, all the quiet dismissals, all the years of being useful instead of loved. My mother had cooked as though I were coming home from war instead of coming home to question my brother. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds, the lemon cake she usually saved for birthdays and church guests. The house smelled warm and buttery, and for a moment that almost undid me. There was something cruel about comfort when it arrived too late, and for the wrong reason. Carol met me at the door with both arms open, her eyes bright, her voice trembling with a kind of pride she had not shown at my promotion ceremony. "There she is," she said, holding me tightly. "Our Major." Over her shoulder, I saw my father standing in the hallway, wearing a button-down shirt and the expression of a man hosting an important visitor. When Mr. Keller from next door walked past with his dog, Dad opened the door wider than necessary and called out, "Major Harper made it home for dinner." He said it loudly, like a line meant for an audience. "Mr." Keller waved, impressed, and I forced a smile. Inside, something in me went very still. 6 weeks earlier, my rank had been pathetic. Now it was useful enough to announce to the neighborhood. Michael arrived 10 minutes later with Lauren beside him. He hugged me too long, patting my back as if we had always been close, laughing near my ear. "Look at you," he said, "the famous one." Lauren gave me a polite hug and a tight smile. She was pretty in a careful, exhausted way, with her blonde hair pulled back and her hands clasped too firmly in front of her. I could tell she knew something, though I could not yet tell how much. At dinner, everyone performed. My mother asked about Virginia. My father asked vague questions about important meetings. Michael made jokes, praised the potatoes, and kept looking at me as if waiting for me to join the script he had written in his head. The strangest part was not their attention. It was what they avoided. No one mentioned the promotion ceremony. No one said they were sorry. Not my mother, who had once driven 6 hours to sit with Michael after a business pitch went badly. Not my father, who had called my promotion pathetic and now seemed eager to place it on display. Their pride had no memory. It only existed when other people were watching. After dinner, Michael asked me to step into the den. He closed the door most of the way, but not fully, which meant my parents could hear if they wanted to. He rubbed his hands together and gave me the same grin he used when asking for favors as a teenager. Listen, he said. This got blown out of proportion. I did not sit down. I asked him why my name was in his contract packet. He looked away, then back at me, injured by the directness of the question. I borrowed your credibility, he said, as if he had borrowed a ladder from the garage. That's all. I didn't think you'd care. Your family. The words struck harder than an apology would have, because they showed me exactly how he had justified it. My life, my rank, my clearance, my reputation, none of it had been real to him as long as he could call it family. When I stepped back into the dining room, my mother was staring at her folded napkin. My father's jaw was tight, but he did not look surprised. Carol whispered, "Your brother made a mistake." Robert added, "We just need you to help keep this from ruining him." That was when the final little piece fell into place. They had not brought me home to love me. They had brought me home because Michael was in trouble, and once again, they expected me to be the strong one who paid the price. I did not report Michael because I wanted to see him punished. That was the part no one in my family would ever understand. In their version of the story, I became cold the moment I stopped protecting him. But the truth was quieter and harder to explain. I reported him because my name was the one thing I still owned. My rank, my record, my clearance, my retirement, my reputation, all of it had been built one hard year at a time, without my family's applause and without their help. If I let Michael use those things as if they were family property, then I would not just be saving him, I would be erasing myself. Over the next several days, I gave the investigators everything they asked for: the forwarded email, the scanned packet, copies of the false signature, screenshots of Michael's messages, notes from our conversation in my parents' den, and the timeline of every strange question he had asked after my photo appeared in the paper. Each document felt like a small betrayal, even though I knew I was not the one who had betrayed anyone. That was the ugly power of family guilt. It could make the person telling the truth feel like the criminal. When Michael invited me to dinner at his house the following Friday, I already knew it was not really an invitation. My mother called it a chance to talk like a family. My father called it putting this nonsense to bed. Michael called it clearing the air. All three phrases meant the same thing. They wanted me in a room full of people where pressure could do what love had failed to do. Michael lived in a 2-story house outside Dayton, newer than our parents' place, with stone trim, bright porch lights, and a front door painted black. It was the kind of house my parents loved because it looked successful from the curb. When I arrived, the driveway was already full. My parents were there, along with Lauren, 2 cousins I had not seen in years, an uncle from my father's side, and 2 men Michael introduced as business friends. The dining room table was crowded with food. No one seemed hungry enough to eat. Lauren moved through the room with a tight smile, refilling glasses and avoiding my eyes. Michael was louder than usual. My father stood near the fireplace like a man preparing to preside over something. For the first 20 minutes, everyone performed politeness. They asked about my flight, my work, the weather in Virginia. Then Robert tapped his glass with the back of a spoon, and the room settled into silence. "The Harper family has always stood together," he said, looking around as if he were giving a toast at a wedding. "We handle things privately. We don't let outsiders twist mistakes into scandals." My mother began crying before he finished. Not loud crying, just enough to make people uncomfortable. Michael leaned forward and placed a paper in front of me. "All you need to do," he said, "is sign a clarification. Say there was a misunderstanding. Say I had informal permission to reference you. That's it! Then this goes away." I looked at the paper, then at his face. He still believed there was a version of me that would do it. Maybe there had been. Once. Maybe the girl from Maple Ridge Lane, the one who worked diner shifts and swallowed disappointment, would have picked up the pen, just to make everyone stop looking at her. But that girl had spent 18 years becoming someone else. I reached into my bag and took out my own folder. The sound it made when I laid it on the table was small, but the room changed around it. "That signature is not mine," I said. My voice did not shake. I never agreed to serve as a reference for Harper Strategic Solutions. I never approved the use of my rank, my position, or my service record in any proposal. My military role was used to create credibility for a company I had no involvement with. And this family tried to pressure me into risking my career to protect Michael from the consequences of what he did. No one spoke. One of Michael's business friends stared down at his plate. Lauren closed her eyes. My mother whispered my name like a warning. Then the doorbell rang. It was not dramatic. No one screamed. No one ran. Michael simply turned his head, and for the first time that night, the confidence drained from his face. When Lauren opened the door, 2 federal investigators stood on the porch in dark coats, their badges shown briefly and calmly. They asked for Michael Harper. He rose slowly, one hand still resting on the back of his chair, as if the room had tilted beneath him. In that moment, he understood what I had already understood. I was no longer the sister who cleaned up the mess. My father turned on me with a look so full of fury it almost looked like fear. "You embarrassed this family," he said. I looked at him, then at my mother, then at Michael standing silent beside the table. "No," I said. "I gave this family the one thing it never gave me: the truth." Michael pleaded guilty the following spring. By then, the story had already changed shape so many times in Dayton that I barely recognized it when it came back to me. Some people said I had turned on my own blood. Others said Michael had been careless, not criminal. A few, usually people who had never once called me during the years I was deployed, suddenly had strong opinions about loyalty, forgiveness, and what a sister should be willing to do. I stopped trying to correct them. There are versions of a story that people choose because the truth would force them to rearrange too much of what they believe. The official version was simpler. Michael had falsified documents, misrepresented a military connection, and used my name and rank to give his company credibility it had not earned. Harper Strategic Solutions folded before the sentencing. The office sign came down. The website disappeared. The business cards my mother had once saved like family heirlooms ended up meaningless pieces of thick paper in a drawer somewhere. When Michael was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, I felt no rush of satisfaction. I had imagined, in darker moments, that consequences might feel clean. I thought perhaps there would be one sharp breath of relief, one quiet confirmation that I had done the right thing and that justice had a shape I could recognize. But it did not feel like that. It felt heavy. It felt like standing in the remains of a house after the fire had been put out. The flames were gone, but everything still smelled of smoke. Lauren left the house in Dayton not long after the sentencing. I heard it from Hank, who heard it from someone at the grocery store, which was how Dayton had always delivered its truths, half-whispered, half-polished, passed from one person to another until pain became neighborhood information. She took only what fit in her car at first, then came back with her brother for the rest. I did not blame her. Maybe she had known more than she admitted. Maybe she had known less than I suspected. Either way, she had been living inside Michael's version of success, and when that collapsed, there was nothing sturdy left for her to stand on. My parents stayed in their house on Maple Ridge Lane, but something around them changed. My father no longer held court at the hardware store with the same easy confidence. My mother stopped lingering after church. People were still polite to them, because politeness is how small communities hide their judgment. But the admiration they had built around Michael thinned until there was almost nothing left. For years, they had measured family by appearances. Now, appearance had become the one thing they could not repair. I went back to Alexandria after the sentencing and returned to a life that looked ordinary from the outside. I rented a small house on a quiet street with a narrow front porch and enough morning light to keep plants alive. I bought 3 pots of lavender, 2 ferns, and a stubborn little rosemary plant that seemed determined to survive even when I forgot to water it. I started walking before work, not far at first, just a few blocks while the neighborhood was still waking up. The air in Virginia felt softer than Ohio had that winter. Some mornings were misty, some clear, some damp enough to curl the ends of my hair, but I walked anyway. It was not healing in the dramatic way people describe when they want pain to sound useful. It was smaller than that. It was waking up and realizing no one was asking me to fix what they had broken. It was drinking coffee in a kitchen where no one used love as a debt. It was learning that silence could be peaceful when it was not full of things I was afraid to say. I called Hank one Sunday evening, after carrying the same story around for too long. I told him about the documents, the dinner, the investigators, the sentence, and the strange emptiness that followed. He listened the way he had always listened, without rushing to fill every pause. When I finished, I expected advice. Instead, he was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just lets you sleep at night." I wrote that sentence down after we hung up, not because it fixed anything, but because it was true. I had spent most of my life believing strength meant endurance. Be strong enough to understand, strong enough to forgive, strong enough to show up when no one showed up for me. Strong enough to carry the family name, the family shame, the family expectations. But strength, I learned, was not always the same as suffering. Sometimes strength was refusing to become the soft place where everyone else's consequences landed. Sometimes it was letting people be disappointed in you because you had finally stopped abandoning yourself. I did not win. Winning would have meant having a family that loved me before I became useful. Winning would have meant seeing my father in that auditorium, my mother wiping her eyes, Michael joking because he was proud and not because my title could help him. I did not get that family. Maybe I never had it, but I kept my name. I kept my honor. I kept the life I had built, and in the quiet house in Alexandria, with lavender by the door and morning light across the floor, I finally understood that freedom did not always arrive with joy. Sometimes it came tired, bruised, and late, but it came. Sometimes the miracle is not that a broken family becomes whole again. Sometimes the miracle is that God gives a weary heart the courage to stop carrying what was never meant to be carried alone. In everyday life, many people smile through pain, forgive without being asked, and keep showing up for those who never truly see them. But peace can be holy, too. Walking away from harm with truth in your hands is not weakness. It may be the quiet door God opens when every other door has been closed. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs strength today. Leave a comment about a time you had to choose peace over pleasing others, and subscribe for more emotional family stories. May God bless you, protect your heart, and guide you toward the people who love you with honesty, kindness, and grace.